Hi, welcome. Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. It's springtime now. That's cool. Kind of springtime, kind of not. It's very bright outside, so I hope you can see the screen okay. Let me know if you're having issues. Trying to think if I have any reminders. I think the biggest reminder is just that you've got HTML me something assignments out. So if you haven't got a start on that, you might want to consider getting started on that today, perhaps, after we're done with lecture. We'll see. I know that the prep work's not showing up on Canvas yet, but it does exist, I promise. So it will be posted on Canvas, or if you want to get started on it sooner than that, you can just actually get to it through the website, let me see if I can pull it up real quick. Yeah, through this website, I can go up through here and click classes and see the class for number 3 right here. So if you want to get a head start on that before it gets posted, or on any class for that matter, you can take a look at these, and yeah, it's all there. You can see what we're going to do from now until the end of the unit. Any questions on logistics or assignments or anything like that before we talk about today's stuff? So I owe you guys some full disclosure before we get into today's topic. We actually had you read a little thing as part of the prep about what it means to be a web developer, or it might be on for today. I can't remember where it was posted, but I am not a web developer. That is not me. So I am familiar with these concepts. I've used them before. This is not my area of expertise, so my knowledge in this area is a little bit shallower than some of the other material that we'll cover. I just want to make that absolutely clear before we go on. I'm not an expert in CSS. I know enough to be dangerous, and so I'll do my best to help you. Just keep that in mind as we go along. So let's talk about CSS. What is it? What the heck is it? CSS stands for, does anybody know what it stands for? Cascading style sheets. So a lot of times when I talk to people about this, the style sheets part of it makes sense, but the cascading part really doesn't make sense. Does anybody know why we call it a cascading style sheet? Yeah.
Because priority is based at the bottom.
Priority is based at the bottom? What do you mean by the bottom of what?
You have conflicting styles. The bottom most style is the...
Yes, that's right. So it's possible to have more than one styles applied to the same element. I can have multiple style sheets, and those style sheets may have things that conflict with one another. They're trying to both style the same element. And so I have to make a choice which one wins. And the answer to that question is whichever one is closest to the bottom, whichever one is closest to the actual content. That's where the term cascading comes from, because those changes cascade from one sheet to the next, right? We'll see a little bit of that later. I doubt that you saw much of that in the prep work, so I'm actually surprised that you were able to answer that question. Thank you. That was great. Why is it separate from HTML? Why do we go out of our way to keep our CSS separate? We actually talked about this a little bit on Monday. I can put CSS in my HTML, right, if I want to. I mentioned on Monday that I don't really like that so much. And even in the prep work today, I think they had you do that a little bit, right? But then they pretty quickly moved you out of doing that. Why? Why do we keep them separate? Yeah. There we go. Yeah, that last thing you said especially was the answer I'm looking for. So, but the first thing you said is also true. Organization matters, right? It matters quite a lot. So keeping our content separate from how that content looks, right? The display of our content is good organization, and it provides the very, very good additional benefit of allowing me to reuse the CSS across many different pages if I want to. If I just dump the CSS into my HTML, then if I wanted to use that same CSS somewhere else, I'd have to copy the whole thing over again, and copy it over again and over again, and that's going to be problematic. So it allows us to get some good reusability. So If I'm not going to put it directly in the HTML, what am I going to do? I'm going to put it in its own file, and then what? I use the link. I use that link tag, and that shows up where? It's in the header. It's in the header of my HTML files. How many CSS files can I link to one HTML file? As many as I want, as many as I need to get the job done, right? In fact, it's not unusual to see lots. And by lots, I mean, you know, half a dozen is not crazy, an absurd amount. If I saw 20, that might cause an eyebrow to raise, like, what's going on here? But, you know, it's not unusual to see multiple CSS files linked to a single HTML page. Good. What's the box model? Somebody describe the box model to me? It's a very abstract concept, I think, but an important one when working with CSS.
One has content and padding and margin.
Padding and margin. So right, it's just a way of describing the elements that we want to display on our web page. So we are quite if we're talking about the box model, we are quite literally thinking of every single piece of content on my page inside of a box, right? And that's a little bit misleading when I say every single thing. It's possible to kind of mix and match. Not everything has to be in a box, but if I am using the box model, it's pretty common that I'm going to have every piece of content inside of a box. And so once I can visualize that in my head, and actually next time you visit the websites that you like to go to, you can actually kind of start to see this and visualize this in your mind. You can start to picture where those boxes are on the page, right? You can actually see it. And so once I know where those boxes are, then I can, the trick to get the layout right is just a matter of manipulating those boxes. And you actually already mentioned a couple of ways that we can do that. Things like padding, things like margins. What's the difference between padding and margins? Padding adds space no matter where you put it, and you said margins are specific to the outside of the box?
Or like, so the margins are...
One of them's outside the box and one of them's inside the box. That's how I view it, right? Which one's which? Margins outside, padding is inside. So how much space do I want from the edge of the box to the thing versus how much space do I want from the edge of the box to the edge of the next box, right? That's the difference between those two. It can be a confusing distinction to make, but it makes a difference. It's an important distinction to make. What are some other ways we can manipulate this box model besides padding and margins? Positioning. That's actually the next thing on my list, so let's talk about it. How do we position stuff? What are some of the ways that we can use to position things in CSS? There's a few different ways, yeah. To relative, so what does that mean? If I use relative positioning, what does that mean?
So, like, if we have two boxes, say,
Mm-hmm. It's relative to the other contents of the page, right? That's what we mean by relative. I'm positioning relative to the other stuff that's already on the page. That's right.
Fair to say that it's relative space,
Well, there can be overlapping of boxes, though. That was something that we did see as well. How do I make things overlap? What do I manipulate? It's the particular value. It's the z value, z index. That's how I can make things overlap. So, but we actually can use those things in conjunction. We can have things overlapping and still position them relatively. That is still possible. Yep. In fact, CSS, maybe you discovered this as you were going through the prep work. CSS is pretty darn flexible. It really does not care a whole lot about what you try to do. The tricky part about CSS, in my opinion, through my experience with it, is if I, making the picture in my head match what's on the screen, right? I know what I want it to look like. How do I tell CSS to make it that way? I can tell CSS almost whatever I want, and it's not going to complain very much. But I need to tell it how to make the picture that's in my head. That's where it gets a little bit tricky. What's another way we can position things besides relative? There's at least one or two other ways.
Absolute.
Absolute is the other way. So absolute is, as the name implies, I provided a strict coordinate. This is where you go. You go right here. We actually don't see absolute used very much. Why not? You might run into some of that. When might you see that, though, is sort of the... Mobile devices really killed absolute positioning pretty badly. But even before mobile devices came around, absolute positioning was still not the greatest idea because, your monitor is not going to be the same as somebody else's monitor. So you position it at what looks good on your computer, it may not look good on somebody else's. So absolute positioning is not really commonly used. There are certain, narrow uses for it. But these days, relative is a much more widely used positioning scheme because it allows us to accommodate for any screen size that somebody might be using to access your website, whether it be a giant TV or a phone or anything in between. Great. Are there any questions about that? Or I know we didn't cover every single last detail. I've actually got more CSS stuff, but any questions so far? All right, let's talk a little bit more. What's a selector? What is a selector? So it could be a tag like P. Those aren't the only kinds of selectors, though. What does a selector in general do?
Tells the CSS what you're gonna, or which element you're gonna manipulate.
Yeah. So yeah, what am I currently trying to change the look and feel of? What style am I currently trying to manipulate? So we heard tags mentioned as a possible type of selector. I can write down a P tag, and then any CSS that I write will be applied to every P tag, right? Every single P tag. That's not the only type of selector. What other kinds of selectors exist that we can use? Class and ID, those are big ones. We're going to be using those quite a bit, actually. So how do those work? Let's start with class. How do I write a class selector? Yeah.
Assign a class in HTML.
Okay.
That's what that was the period before the class.
Perfect. So I have to go into the HTML. I have to find the elements plural, right? Or it doesn't have to be plural, but it could be plural, and apply the class to them. I'm basically using the class as a category. It allows me to put things into different bins, to different buckets that I want to be styled in a similar way. So I apply the class to the tags that I want to be grouped together. And then I go back into my CSS and I say dot followed by the class name, and then any tag that is marked with that class will take on that CSS. So ID is a little bit different, right? Similar, but a little bit different. Somebody explain to me how ID works? More specific. So with ID, I probably don't expect to see a lot of things with that same ID. I might even expect it to be just a unique element. And what's the selector look like? Hashtag. We used to call that a pound sign when I was a kid, but people don't call it that anymore. But yes, that's what it is. Hashtag. Any other selectors that you remember seeing in the prep work? There's still more. I'm sorry? Importance. So what does the important selector do? Yeah, it overrides everything else. That can be a little dangerous. It's like taking a sledgehammer to your CSS, right? So yes, it exists. Yes, we can use it. We need to be careful. We need to be careful about doing that. Maybe a regular old hammer is the better tool for the job. It might have some unintended side effects if you decide to go in with the important selector. Any others that are worth discussing? So we talked about tags, we talked about class, we talked about ID. Those are the big ones, honestly. Those three, tags, class, ID. If those are the only three that you know, you can go a pretty long way with just those three. There are others. I'm sorry? Pseudo classes, yeah. Pseudo classes were in there. What's a pseudo class? It's a tricky concept.
Yeah, like you have a button, cover.
So having an action associated with a tag, yeah, that's right. We see it sometimes with maybe like links as well, how they turn purple after you click on them, stuff like that. So yeah, pseudo classes can be used to apply styles based on different behaviors that can happen within your other classes. And actually, we could actually spend probably a whole lecture period talking about selectors. I don't want to do that. I can think of better ways, better things to talk about, but it is a very deep subject. We have just scratched the surface, and this is, at least in my personal experience, selectors, knowing what selectors to use at what point in time has been one of the tricky parts for me personally in learning how to be effective with my CSS. It takes some practice, and just to make things even more complicated, right? I can use selectors in combinations as well. I don't just have to use one tag or one class or one ID. I can have a tag and a class, right? Or any combination of those values can be combined together to provide a more narrowly focused selector. Any questions about that? Any questions? All right, let's talk about something that's maybe a little bit more easy to wrap our brains around. How are colors specified in CSS? It's an attribute with a value. What's that value look like? A string? It's an RGB value. Yeah, we actually saw RGB values before, right? When we were doing stuff with images in Python. So, one of the things that I use a lot if I'm messing around with CSS is a color picker. This is a great website to have handy if you're working on your HTML something, you want to pick out some fancy colors for your website. Having a color picker is nice because it allows me to pick a color that I'm interested in and then shows me various shades and also shows me how text is going to look so I can see if it's going to be readable or not. And then the values, right? I can see the values here. And I said these are RGB values, and I meant it. These actually are RGB values. The first two characters represent the red, the second two represent the green, and the last two represent the blue, I believe. But these look a little funky, right? Does anybody know what these actually are? Hexadecimal? Yeah, they're hexadecimal values. I'm not going to dive too deep down that rabbit hole today, although that is a subject that I certainly love to talk about. It relates to binary and how computers see the world. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, stop me today and we can have a chat about it. But what we basically need to know, right, is that if I'm manipulating colors, you can actually see this number here. This is a number. I know it's got letters in it. It's a number. Corresponds to these values. So 255 is the FF part. That text is real small. I should have zoomed in, sorry. So the 255, oh, hey. The 255 is the FF. The 99 corresponds to 153, and the CC corresponds to 204. If you were curious. So, yeah. Definitely look up a color picker, or this is the one that I actually use. It's just the first one that happens to pop up on Google. It's a handy thing to have when you're designing your web page. Let's see, where are we at? That's the end of my CSS review. So I want to acknowledge that there was a lot more CSS stuff in the prep work that I have not talked about. Was there anything in the prep work that you went through today that you were hoping that we would discuss, or anything that you had questions on? Now would be the time to talk about it. Yeah, what's up?
It seems like there's a lot of very specific designators in CSS for like text formation or font family and all that stuff. There's a lot more
for fonts.
Specific terminology for fonts.
Yeah, so I actually thought that the prep work material on fonts did not go super deep into what you can do with fonts. There's actually a bit more you can do
There was a
there.
spot where you could click on and you could see the list of what's loaded on most,
Mm.
on like most computers.
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
But so, surprise, surprise, I'm actually at the same website where I was a second ago, W3 Schools. It's a fantastic website. If you have questions about HTML or CSS, this is like one of the greatest resources on the web that I can recommend. If you are, it's a good reference, right? It's not a website that you just are gonna sit down and read like a book. It's like a website where you're like, what does that tag do again? Let me go look it up on W3 Schools. That's what this website is for. It's a great reference. And so you can see they have a reference page on fonts as well, and font families that you can choose on your websites. I have to say that I, in my personal experience, have not messed around with these too much. But the thing that I probably have messed around with the most is like the sizing of fonts, and there's actually multiple ways that you can size things with fonts. Pixels used to be a very common way to size fonts, and still is used somewhat frequently, but has a little bit of a problem, especially with modern computers. They have the high density displays. So 1 pixel on a high density display is a lot smaller than 1 pixel on just a regular LCD screen. So sizing things in terms of pixels, it'll look a lot smaller on one of those high density displays than on one of the older screens, for example. So there are other ways. There are other ways for sizing. One of the more popular ones these days is to use EM as your size unit. And so as you can see the description here, 1 EM is equal to the current font size. So whatever the user's operating system has set as the current font size is what it will use, right? So you're in effect letting the user dictate what the base font level is. And then if you want fonts to be bigger, you can say, 2.5 EM, which will scale it up 2.5 times what their base font size was, right? So it's just a more relative way of accessing fonts. And everything that I do these days, I try to use EM to specify font sizes in. Especially if you're ever trying to do anything with mobile devices. I'm sure we've all had experiences where we go to a website that just looks like garbage on a mobile website. This is not the only reason. There are lots of reasons why websites look like garbage on your phone. But this is certainly a reason why a website might look like garbage on your phone. It's because they're not sizing the fonts properly. Yeah, great question. Any other questions before we switch gears a little bit? So the next thing on my agenda to talk about today is Git. We're going to keep talking about Git quite a bit this unit. We're going to try and get you all to be more familiar with it as time goes on. So let's talk about Git a little bit more. We introduced it a little bit on Monday. Today I want to talk to you about branches and remotes. So let's start with branches. What is a branch? Can somebody describe to me in English what a branch is? Copy. Yeah, I know what you mean. I think it's a little more nuanced than that, but yeah, it's a good starting point. It's a good starting point. Does anybody have anything to contribute? Yeah. Yeah, that's what we use them for, right? So that's a big reason why branches exist. It allows me to create different little compartments for the different pieces of my program that I'm working on. So think about it this way. If I've got a lot of people working on the same project, right? So I'm making changes and you're making changes and your neighbor's making changes. It's possible that if we're all making changes to the code at the same time, that our changes are gonna cause weird effects or conflict with each other, and we may not be able to easily identify if the changes in the program are due to what I've done, or if they're due to what you did, or to what somebody else did. And so by using a branch, it allows us to each have our own, consistent starting point. and the changes that I make are only on my branch, and the changes that you make are only on your branch. And so we have our own little sandbox that we can play in, and we can tweak it, and we can get our code working just the way that we want. And then once we're ready, what do? Once we're happy,
Get the merger.
we merge it back. We merge it back into the main branch. And that's what everybody else is going to be doing as well, right? Once they get their code working the way they want, they'll merge theirs back in. And so that's how new things are going to get added to our application over time. So when I think of branches, I'm a big science fiction nerd. I imagine it as like an alternate universe, right? That's what it is. It's an alternate timeline where, what's happening in this branch is similar, but not exactly the same as what's happening in this branch. And I guess where that analogy fails is at the end, where we have to merge them all back together. That's kind of how I keep track of branches in my head. So how do we make a new branch? Yeah, what's up? Sorry. Is a branch like an instance? I don't think so. I'm not sure that it's an apples to apples comparison because Git is not a programming language. It does not allow us to make programs. It just allows us to manage our code base, if that makes sense. So Git is not adding anything to our program directly. Git is not changing the code of our program. We are making those changes. And Git is providing tools that help us do that in an organized way. I think even a copy, which was originally suggested, I think that's maybe a little bit of too much of a simplification for a branch, but it's actually not bad. It's not a bad way of thinking about it. It's a copy. So how do I create a branch? Yeah.
From your master file, you would just git add a new branch.
Yeah, so we can do it on the command line, right? We've been doing all of our Git stuff on the command line, so I can add a new branch, and then usually it automatically switches me over to any new branch that I create. So if I want to switch to another branch, or how do I get a list of the branches that I have? I'm sorry? Just git branch, yeah. Git branch will give me a list, and then if I say git branch and then the name of a branch, it'll switch me over to the one that I want to work in. And then you got to check out. I'm sorry, you're correct. Yeah, sorry, thank you. Git checkout is how we switch from one branch to the next. I apologize. Combining, we actually already talked about. It's about merging. Here's a tricky one. When should you create a new branch? When should you? I'm sorry? When you have a new. And so let's extend that. I like what you said. Anytime I have a new feature or a new bug that I'm trying to fix or anything like that, anytime I'm adding to the code is what a lot of people would say in answer to this question. Think about what that means. I have my master branch. I never, ever, 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 ever add code directly to the master branch. The only way the code gets added to a master branch is by merging in the other branches. So if I'm on master, I should not be changing code, right? That's the Git way of viewing the world. If I'm on the master branch, I should not be editing files, I should not be changing code, with the possible exception of like when I first create the repository, right? There are exceptions to every rule, and this one's no different, but in the general case, I'm going to modify my code by creating a new branch and doing all my work there, and then merging those changes. Yes?
My understanding is that if you were to add a branch to a branch, and go back to master and the log, you will not see that like sub-branch, right? So is there like a written rule or unwritten rule for like general project development, like how many sub-branches to take?
Yeah. That's a good question. So the question's about sub-branches, and so we're diving deep in the rabbit hole, which is good. I like talking about this kind of stuff. I can make branches that come off of branches, just like a tree, right? Just think about a tree and how you've got a big branch with smaller branches coming off of that and smaller branches coming off of that. Git can do the same thing. And so the question was, it can be kind of hard to keep all those sorted out. You may not know what subbranches exist because you can only see them if you're on the branch, right? And in general, I would say, yeah, you don't want to get too carried away with it. Now, I can't stand up here and say there's a number, right? You should never go X number of branches deep. Is there a number? I mean, not really. There's a ballpark. It's one of those situations where you just kind of got to go with your gut a little bit on that one. Like, is 20 branches deep too much? Yeah, probably. Is 3 branches deep too much? Probably not. Is 10 branches too deep? Well, we're getting closer to that gray area, right? Where maybe in some situations it'd be okay, in other cases it might not. So you kind of just got to trust your gut feel on that one a little bit. I do want to say that especially for this class even, just going 1 branch deep is enough to get a lot of the major situations taken care of. Making branches off of branches is not something that needs to be done on a super regular basis. Yes? That's a good question. So the question was, if I have different branches that need to work together, is there a way to merge those without bringing them back to the master? And the answer to that question, I think, actually, is what we were just talking about, using a branch off of a branch. Because I can merge a branch. When I merge a sub-branch, where does it get merged to? It doesn't get merged to master. It gets merged to the branch that was right before it. So that would be, I think, the official answer to your question. Like most things with computers, there are probably other hackier, less recommended solutions that would get you there as well. But that's probably the cleanest way to do it, to make a branch off of a branch. And so you might do that in a case where maybe you want to add a feature to your program, but you're not exactly sure how it should be added, so you want to try out a few different possible approaches and then see which one is going to work the best. That might be a good use case for having branches off of branches, right? Would allow you to swap those branches in and out and see how they might work, as one possible example. Yes?
Is there a way, though, to see from the master the entire tree?
Is there a way to see? Let's see. I don't know the answer to this question off the top of my head, but I know somebody who does. His name is Google. Git see all branches. I don't know. Maybe that's not specific enough. There's a -A. There's a -A flag that you can pass to show branch. So that's just remote and local, which we haven't gotten to remotes yet. That's next on my list to talk about. Let's see. Git see sub branches. Oops, spelled it wrong. Still spelled it wrong, but whatever. It knows what I mean. How to get a list of all branches created off of a Git branch. That's kind of what we're looking for, right? Yeah, this is kind of what we're asking. Maybe a little bit. Yeah, not exactly though. I don't know why commits are coming into it. Anyway. I don't know. I'm not finding a satisfactory answer to your question. Yeah, what's up? You could go onto GitHub, sure, and use the... You could, yeah. If you have a remote, you could go onto GitHub or whatever you're using to store your remote and view the branches that way. But it's not always convenient if I'm, during doing work on the command line to have to fire up a browser and do that. Yeah, I'm not able to find a. Did you mean git c sub branches? List all branches, local and remote, but it doesn't say anything about sub-branches. I suspect the answer is yes, there is a way to do it, but it seems like it's not a very commonly asked question. Yeah, I would think that get branch would do it. Show branch, yeah. I would think so, but you might have to pass in some of these additional options to make it happen. So, what other? I thought I saw another hand. Yeah, what's up? Yeah. So you're gonna make me spill the beans, huh? I've already sort of spilled the beans to a few people here and there, but surprise! You don't have to use the command line to interact with Git. There's actually graphical interfaces available that you can use to click on buttons and do things that way if you want to. This is the part where you all get out your pitchforks and start rioting. And where I try to say, no, but wait. We're trying to help you learn. And I got to be honest with you, I'm not just saying this because I'm trying to make a point. I'm saying it because it's true. I use Git on the command line. I know about the graphical user interfaces. I don't think that I even have them installed on my computer right now. It's possible that maybe I have one on here, but I don't use it. I know how to, but I use the command line for everything. Why? It's more direct, it's faster. I can navigate and get around a lot faster. I think that's true of a lot of things on the command line. Even just the stuff that we've been doing with files and folders, right? You can do all that stuff in the window. Just right click and create a new folder or whatever. You know, you can do all that stuff. So why do we do it on the command line? It's quick, it's fast. There are other reasons why I can advocate for command line, one of which even being your own personal health. Using a mouse, especially a trackpad, is really, really bad for your wrists. If you're using a trackpad, I would suggest it, at the very least, getting an external mouse, or maybe going a step farther and trying to use the command line more often, because your wrists will last longer if you keep your hands on the keyboard and not the trackpad. That's been proven over multiple studies on carpal tunnel syndrome. Trackpads are terrible, 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 terrible for your wrists. And I've had personal experience with that myself. I've had wrist injuries because of that. And so that's another reason why I personally go out of the way to try and use the command line more. But even if that wasn't true, it's just faster. It's more efficient. It's a more efficient way to get the work done. End soapbox for now, unless you want me to keep going. I could. Somebody ask me a question before I keep going. No? Are we good? All right, I got some more questions for you. Let's talk about remotes. What is a remote? We sort of touched on this a little bit. Where's your remote at? Where would I go to find the remote? GitHub. I'd go to GitHub. It's not the only place to go. There are other websites online that will store your Git repositories for you. GitHub is by far the most popular one out there, so it's a good one to be on. So why? Why do we have remotes? What's the big deal?
Multiple people can see and work off of it.
Yeah, it's critical, right? If it's only on my computer, how's somebody else supposed to work on it? How's somebody else supposed to see that code? It's supposed to interact with that code. So the remote is on the internet. We can say it's on the cloud if you want to, use that jargon. It's on the internet so that somebody else can also see that code. But that introduces problems, right? That introduces the potential for problems, the potential for bad things to happen. Bad things like what? I'm sorry? Somebody else messing with your code? I'm thinking more along the lines of, I make a change, you make a change, we both change the same thing but in a different way, right? Now what? That's called a conflict. That's called a conflict. And we're going to see conflicts today as part of the studio. We're going to force you to make a conflict today in studio. We're going to make you do it, and then we're going to make you fix it. I'm pretty sure that's on the agenda for today anyway. So remotes, certainly valuable, certainly necessary if I'm working in a group setting with other people on a project. I have to have my code in a publicly accessible place, right? So I've got, now think about this, I've got not just one copy of my repository, but I've got lots. I've got the one on the remote. I've got the one on my computer, we call that a local copy, but then anybody else who's also working has a local copy on their computer too, right? And so once I'm done working, once I've finished my stuff and I've merged my changes back into master, right? Or even if I haven't merged my changes back into master, I need to go home for the day, right? And I haven't quite finished yet, and I just want to save my stuff. I need to take my code from my local copy on the computer, and I need to send it to the remote. What's that called? How do I do that? That's a push. That's a push operation. I take something from my local copy, some changes that I've made. I can't push them right away, right? What do I have to do first? I have to commit, and then I push. It's a two-step process. Commit is like, hey, this is a checkpoint, this is a save, right? Take a snapshot of everything as it looks right now. I want you to remember everything just as it is. And then push says, all right, take that snapshot that you just made, take that commit, send it up to the remote so that it now becomes accessible to everybody else who might want to see those changes that I have made. So then if I'm somebody else, how do I see those changes that were made? You pull it. A pull says, go to the remote, see if anybody has made any commits, and if they have, bring them back down and merge them into the stuff that I have. And that's really where things can get out of hand, right? Because if I've made changes to the same things that somebody else has made changes to, when I pull those changes down, Git's going to see that I've got two different versions, and it's going to go, I don't know what to do. And now you've got some work to do to fix that situation. You have to pick one. They can't both survive. You have to pick which one you want to keep, and the other one's going to have to go away. That's what's known as a conflict. Yep. But those are the basics. So, when should I push? When should I push my code? Yeah, if I make a commit, if I'm saying that something's good enough to commit, it's also good enough to push. If I'm not ready to make a standard commit, yes, you're absolutely right. A stash is a good way to temporarily save my code, right? A stash actually takes your changes and kind of removes them and puts them off to the side. And then later on, if I decide I want them back, I can unstash it will try to merge them back in to your repository as one example. Cool. What questions do you have about Git? What questions do you have? I know yeah, Gary, what's up?
How would you delete a repository?
How would you delete a repository? It depends on, are you trying to delete a local repository? If you're trying to delete a local repository, you take the folder and you move it to the recycle bin, and it's gone. Goodbye. If it's on the remote, if it's on a remote, then you got to go to GitHub and delete it through GitHub. That's the way to do it. If I delete the local copy on my computer and then decide, oh shoot, I've made a terrible mistake, I can just go to the remote and grab a new copy, right? What's it mean if I start with nothing and I grab a copy from the remote? What's that called? That's a clone. Yeah, that's a clone. I'm making a copy of what's on the remote. Yep. Great. I know the learning curve is steep on this stuff. I totally understand. I was telling somebody actually right before class that when I first started using Git, it took me a while. It took me a while to really understand what the heck was going on. So I have been where you are right now. If you feel like you're still a little hazy on the Git stuff, if you feel like it's still not making sense to you, I totally understand. I was there. I totally get it. It's going to take practice. It's going to take a little bit of time. It will get easier. It will get better. You will understand it a bit more. And fortunately for you, or unfortunately, depending on how you feel about Git, today's studio is all about it. Today's studio is all about Git. I see some people, looks like they're wiping some sweat off their brow already. We're gonna make you work with Git. This is a nice opportunity because we're gonna make you work with it in a situation where if you screw up, well, who cares? It doesn't matter. It's not your assignment. It's not your code that you're turning in, right? This is a good time for you to screw up and make some mistakes and figure out how to bail yourself out of those mistakes. Because it happens. It happens. And I've been using Git for many years now, and I still regularly screw stuff up all the time. So it's good to get some practice and learn how to figure out some of the issues that you might run into. You are going to need a partner. So it is a group studio today. You're going to need to pair up with somebody, but I'm going to let your TAs handle that part of the process. Before I get out of here, any last questions? Any last comments before we hop into studio? Yeah, what's up?
I have a question and possibly a comment. When we were talking about the sub-branches, how do you create, is it different creating a sub-branch with a different command, or is it just check out into this a branch off of master and then make a branch?
Yeah, I think if you're in a branch and you create another branch, it will be, well, no, that doesn't jive, actually. Yeah, that doesn't jive right. How to create a sub-branch. Oh, okay, so it looks like there's a slash in between. You don't know? You don't agree? Yeah. Git checkout -b sub-branch name. Sub-branch will automatically.
I tried that there, which seemed to have the same result. That just checks out and does branch command all in one.
Yeah.
So I tried that on my computer a few minutes ago, and then I went back to master and branch. It still showed all branches, but it didn't make it clear what was the sub-branch.
Oh, okay.
But it didn't show.
That's the exact same one. I managed to click the exact same one. Yeah. This guy's advertising somebody's tool called GitFlow, it looks like. That's nice. Okay. Check out the branch. You want to create a new branch under the branch. Check out the original branch, now create your new branch. That's what it says.
Yeah, so when I did that and I went back to master, it still listed.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, they even have a nice little diagram. That makes it very easy.
In the command line, when you get branch, it doesn't necessarily show it.
Oh, I see what you're getting at.
So it doesn't
It shows
show
the
like
name,
that.
but it doesn't.
But it's unclear that it's actually a sub-branch. Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. I think you can probably tell by my copious Googling and hand wavy answers that this is an area that I'm not a super duper familiar with. But that's okay. I love the questions. Sorry I can't provide more definitive answers. That's programming though. Don't be afraid to look stuff up that you don't know. It's a good skill. Any other questions before I get out of your way and let you get started on the studio? All right, have fun practicing Git today. I won't be doing a review of the studio because it's not really possible. So you can work on this, and if you finish up, you can start in on HTML me something and or the prep work for next week.